That's such a powerful video. You have to forgive me for actually giving a sermon after it. But I want to put it in context. We remember the God who restores what was lost. We remember people who ran into a building that other people were running out of to go and rescue people who they did not know at all. And in this gospel, we hear about how God regards those who are lost. And we progress from I thought that was my hearing aid at first. And we progress from the illustration of a sheep, a coin, which I'm not sure how valuable the coin might be, but maybe perhaps more valuable than one sheep. And then it goes to a son, a child of the Father, but also a child of God. And so we thought it was appropriate with this video, which talks about what was lost, feeling lost, being afraid, and then remembering that God is a God who comes to us in our extremities, in our needs, in times where we cannot save ourselves. The sheep is lost, can't find its way back. The coin can't move. And the son, is recalcitrant. Even if the father had tried to move towards the son and said, "Get back here," the boy would not have been willing to do it until he came to his senses. And so primarily this gospel has to do with how does God love us when we are lost? How does God love us when we go astray? Do you remember that song? I believe for every drop of rain that falls, a flower grows. There's a part in that that says, I believe for everyone who goes astray, someone will come to show the way. These are the things that we believe. We believe that, but we can lose sight of it in all the things that happen in our regular days. And this is so important for us to know because it begins with the scribes and Pharisees who did everything right as far as the rituals were concerned and the practice of their faith, but had no mercy. They had no compassion. They had no care for the wayward, for the prostitutes, the tax collectors, the sinners. And Jesus went to these people and he said, God loves you too. And as a sign of that, I'm going to sit and talk to you about God. Okay, if I come to dinner at your house? What a sign of acceptance. And that was why they were so upset that this man welcomes sinners and eats with them. So then Jesus tells this long story about the sheep, the coin, and the son. But it's really not one son that is lost, it's two. Two sons are lost. And we'll get to that. A lot of these comments I borrowed from Davis Carman, who's the president of the Apologia Educational Ministries. But then I put in a good number of thoughts of my own. It says, as this chapter opens, Jesus is surrounded by sinners who's drawing near to hear what he has to teach them. The Pharisees and scribes complain. So he tells a story about the sheep, and then it moves to perhaps a question of, is the shepherd to blame with the sheep? Did he actually lose? Did he lose one of his precious lambs? Or did the stray sheep defy the shepherd and run off into the dark side of the valley? Well, then we might say, well, the sheep made bad choices. Which is part of the way the scribes and Pharisees looked at the sinners. Well, look at them. They don't deserve to be with us. They're going to contaminate us. Ooh, sinners. Of course, you contrast that with St. Paul's reading, the second reading. He says, remember this is trustworthy, take it to heart. Jesus came to save sinners, and I myself am the foremost of them. So likely the sheep had simply gone astray, maybe out of ignorant curiosity, or maybe simply wasn't paying attention and wandered off. You remember when Jesus on the cross was dying, and one of the things he said is, Father, forgive them, they don't know what they're doing. Sheep didn't know what it was doing. And when we sin, we don't know what we're doing, really. Who would choose the after effects of sin for the temporary pleasure that we have momentarily, when you have to live with regret and guilt and loss? Because there are concomitant, unintended consequences that come with sin. If we knew them at the beginning, we would never enter into that, we'd never stray into that area. But it seemed like a good idea at the time. Are you seeing any of yourselves in any of these? Remember, the scribes and Pharisees couldn't see themselves in the tax collectors and the sinners. Father, forgive them, they know not what they do. The shepherd was probably good at his work and carefully watched his flock, counting them several times a day to make sure none had wandered off. This is how he noticed one was missing. I love this part. Davis Carmody says, was this particular lamb a repeat offender? It says, some sheep do tend to find themselves in bad situations more easily and more often than others. He said, have you ever considered now here's where I'm saying, have you ever considered yourself undeserving of care because of your mistakes? Has anyone ever said to you, this is all your fault? That doesn't matter to God. What matters is that you were lost and needed to be found. When I was a young lad and watching the sky at night, when you could actually see the Milky Way and stars and things like that, before we got into all the air, light pollution, you could lay on the grass in your little backyard and watch the Milky Way. And so one time I saw lights in the sky circling, going back and forth. I asked my father, I said, what's that? He said, those are searchlights. And I said, what are they doing? He says, they're looking for lost planes. And I thought, what a wonderful thing. That if you're lost and you're in a plane, because you could run out of gas and crash if you're lost, that there's somebody out there looking to help you find your way to safety. My father never told me that what it was the new model cars were coming out at the automobile dealer across the and they got these great big searchlights, and they would put them there, and say, come and buy your new model. I like I like that story so much, I've never forgotten it. I like my father's version better, especially since as a child I knew what it was like to lose sight of my parents and to feel lost. You ever feel lost? Jesus then presents his listeners with another hypothetical situation. A woman has 10 coins, but finds one of them missing. Now, it doesn't say what denomination the coins are. Are they, a denarii, which is more expensive? Are they silver? Are they drachmas? Are they simple like the widow's mite? But the point is, they were valuable to her. So she lights a lamp and sweeps the house, which shows you how much she cares for this one that's missing. You could say maybe she was just tight, maybe she was a miser, maybe she was desperate and she had saved these and were holding them for something important. You ever have it in your family where something comes up and all of a sudden you need some money, and your mother or grandmother would go to a little cup or jar or something or other and take some coins out of it? You know how important and necessary that was? You lose one of those? Let me ask you this. How many people still pick up a penny on the sidewalk? I do. You cheap things, you. Look at you. That's because we remember when a penny was valuable. In fact, if you had a penny, you could get 2 candies for 1 penny. 2 for 1. Remember that? Ah, the good old days. So we remember how valuable just a poor copper penny is. In fact, I understand now they mint them, but it costs more money to produce one than what you can do with it, but people are still attached to them. They don't want us to stop making pennies. And besides, if they stop making pennies, what would happen when you go to a gas station? It says $3.99. Somebody, if you give them $4, somebody has to give you a penny back. Okay, that was really bad. I was a bridge too far. Okay, so the woman clearly kept a close eye on her finances, which is how she realized one of the coins was missing. Maybe she counted the coins on a regular basis, but once she noticed the coins were gone, she leapt into action and searched her home high and low. That one coin was obviously worth a great deal to her. Now, contrarily, here's my thinking, we probably tend to devalue ourselves in the sight of God, knowing our sinfulness. Yet Isaiah reminds us that God asks, could a mother forget her child? Could a mother forget her child? Even if that were possible, I, God, will never forget you. We are always his daughters and sons, valuable not for what we do. Might say, what are we worth? Some people might be worthless in the sights of others. In fact, I had one person one time describe some particularly person who had a really bad example, or was being a bad example. And by the way, no one is useless. Useless is different than worthless. No one is useless because you can always be a bad example to others. Don't be like that. So what happened is we are valuable not for what we do, but for who we are. In God's sight, in God's heart, we are his. If you've ever felt worthless, that's not how God sees you. It's not how God sees you. Now, once she found it, she calls all her friends and neighbors in. Now, no one does that if they just happen upon some loose change while sorting the laundry. Oh, look, 25 cents. Quick, call the neighbors. In fact, I do know a housewife. I shouldn't say housewife. You probably don't use that term anymore. But this is an older couple, and she related to me how when you had the division of labor where the husband worked and then at work and the wife stayed home and worked, but the deal was any money that she found in his pockets as she was washing his clothes, she got to keep. I see some of you nodding. You know, that was part of the deal. I wash his clothes, I get his change. In which case she wasn't calling in the neighbors in and say, hey, another 10 cents. The coin must have been worth much more than a pretty penny. It was valuable because it was part of the whole. And that's another reason why we can never say to another person, you know, we don't need you. You can never say to somebody else, we don't need you. And as a church, we should never say to anybody else, we don't need you. We certainly should never say we don't want you. But as a church community, we should also never say to anybody, there's something wrong with you. God doesn't say that to us. And as the people of God, we should never say that to anyone else. Now, the lost sons. Now, this is, we think of it as the prodigal son, and Davis Carmen says that some accounts credit the priest and theologian Jerome, who lived from around 347 to 420 AD, with giving this story its famous title, The Prodigal Son. It says most Bibles today use it as a heading, so as modern-day readers, we first assume there's only one lost son in the lesson, namely the younger one, who demands his inheritance early. We know the story. His father gives him his inheritance, which was really a stupid thing to do. The young man goes to a distant land and wastes the money, which is what you would expect him to do. He quickly spends every last shekel on reckless living. Now destitute and starving, he comes to his senses, important part in that story, and returns home to beg his father to hire him as a servant. But the father couldn't go out to get the boy to force him to come back. He had to wait till he came to his senses. But he apparently was watching every day for that to happen. So he caught sight of him from a far way off. Now here's the older brother. The reason why the younger son left is the older brother, it's up to the older brother who inherits everything as the firstborn to decide when and how much and if to share the estate with anybody else in the family, specifically the men. And so here is this son who has everything that belongs to the father, and he acts like he's never been given anything. You ever have a child say to you, you never let me have anything? I don't know if they still do that. I see some of you smiling at this, you know. And so what happens is the second son is lost too. The older son is lost. He has everything, but he doesn't value it. And perhaps, you know, there's nothing worse than somebody who doesn't appreciate their blessings. And have we ever been in that situation where, you know, we're not really looking at how blessed we are. We're looking at how more blessed we could be. we never really look at the things that we take for granted as being valuable because we take them for granted. We sometimes have no idea how lucky we are. And part of the problem, part of the struggle, is that why do we try to gauge the happiness in our life against what other stuff people have? Why is it that because somebody else has more stuff than we have, we envy them? What truly makes us blessed? It's not stuff. And when the father says to the oldest son, I don't know what you're talking about. Everything I have is already yours. For goodness sake, if you really wanted a fatted calf, you could have had it by just asking. You know, and so that son was lost too, but didn't know it. And so here we have the older son may not be a prodigal, but he's also lost. He just doesn't know it. He's a little like the Pharisees. He does all the right things. I never disobeyed one of your orders, but his heart is far from his father. And so sometimes when you look at the Pharisees and say, yeah, okay, they weren't big sinners, but they had no love for God. They loved themselves. And I remember when Jesus told the story about two people came into church to pray. One was a horrible sinner who just barely went in the back door and said, oh, Lord, be merciful to me, a sinner, wouldn't even lift his face to heaven. And the other one came in, went to the very front and said, oh, God, I thank you that I'm not like the rest of men, like this poor schmo behind me. And then Jesus says, whose prayer do you think was heard? And so that is why this scripture and this video is so important, because the video talks about remembering and knowing that God can restore what is lost. And we have to remember that all of us in some way, at least at some point in our life, are lost, will be lost. And we have to be able to have confidence in the God who restores. And we also have to know that we can never say to anybody else, for whatever reason we think is appropriate, there's something wrong with you. God can't love you as much as he can love me because you're different than I am. That's not how God works. And I really look forward to the day where the church works that way as well, because lots of times the institutional church and society, you know, they all say, hey, this is the way we think things should be. And if somebody comes along that's different for whatever reason, then they say, oh, well, no. Hands off. Who are they to make that decision? It's not up to them. And so that's one reason why it's up to us, if we realize how much God loves us. If we really did, that we would probably then say to somebody else, hi, what's your name? You come to church, you're a believer. Me too. You know, ever feel lost?